Hey, we're going to be a little shorter than usual because of Hanukkah, so we can light, but we should be able to have a good. Okay, so we're going to reread what we started at the end of last time. So 10b2, the bottom of the first column. So just to recap, we'll read it, but it's comparing when you had maaser sheni money in a pouch, and then you either found more money or less money in the pouch. What's the halacha? And we're comparing it with our halacha of when you had two birds or three birds in a certain dovecote, and then either you had more or less. Uh, so that's what it was. So shlosha matzah shnayim mutarim. If you had three before Yantif that you designated, and then you found two, you're allowed to eat those two on Yantif. My time, why? Hani inhu ninhu. These two that are there are the same that were there before Yantif. Achad minayo azal alman. One of them went away. Leim masnis and Rabbi hivul rabbanon. So let's say that our Mishnah follows the opinion of Rabbi and not Rabbanon, because a lot of times the Gemara doesn't. I mean, the Mishnah doesn't say who the author is. The Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi made it stam, but sometimes we don't know who the stam was. So the Gemara tries to infer who the Tana is, and that might impact who we would paskin like sometimes. So let's say the Mishnah is Rabbi and not the Chachamim. The Tanya, because we learned in the Brisa, Hiniach mana umatzah masayim chulun u'maitzur sheni muravim zebazeh. So we mentioned that. Well, maybe I forgot to, but again, it's important to go over this every time. When you have a pile of produce, or depending on the produce, it's midaraisa midrabanan, you separate truma, a 40th, a 50th, or 60th, give it to the Kohen. Then you have to take a tenth off of that, a tenth that's remaining, and give that to the Levi. Okay, but I gave you a cookie already. And you give a tenth to a Levi, and a Levi has to give a portion to the Kohen as Trumas Maaser. Then, depending on the year of the Shemitah cycle, you take Maaser Sheni or Maaser Ani. In the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of the Shemitah cycle, there's Maaser Sheni, which literally means the second tithe, that you eat in Yerushalayim. You bring up and eat Yerushalayim. If it's too hard, you can redeem it onto coins. And similar to what we learned about Shemitah, the sanctity of the Maaser Sheni transfers from the food to the coins. And then when you buy food in Yerushalayim with that money, the Kedusha transfers back off of the coin onto the food, and then you fulfill your Maaser Sheni by eating it. And just in the third and sixth years of the Shemitah cycle, it's Maaser Ani, which just goes to poor people. In general, it doesn't have to be in Yerushalayim or not. So Maaser Sheni is the only of these matanos. Okay, can I give you some? So that's the only, Maaser Sheni is the only one that the Kedusha transfers onto something. So so if you found, you had 100 zuz, a certain amount of money that was Maaser Sheni money in a pouch or a container, and then later you found 200 zuz. So chulin Maaser Sheni meravim zebazeh, the Brisa says someone put regular money that doesn't have the Kedusha, the sanctity of Maaser Sheni, mixed up together. Divrei Rabbi, this is Rabbi's opinion. V'chachamim omrim chulin. Hakol and the Chachamim say that this money, none of it is Maaser Sheni money because you wouldn't have mixed it together. So the money that's here is all regular money. There's no kedusha on it, which means it's good. You could spend that whatever you want, whenever you want. Hiniach masayim. What if you left 200 zuz that were Maaser Sheni money, umatzah mana, and you only found 100 zuz, manamutach umunamoto. So we say that you left 100 of the 200 that were in there, and you left 100. So all this 100 that's there has sanctity of Maaser Sheni. So you can't just spend it. You have to bring it up to Yerushalayim. And 100 of it, someone did something else with it. Divrei Rabbi, these are the words of Rabbi, v'chachamim omri hakachulin, and the chachamim say, just like the other case, it's all regular money. So the chachamim say when you left something there and you came back and something else is there, or not the same amount, we assume that was there before is gone and this is all regular. So that's doesn't fit. Or if it was added, the regular stuff that was in there before was moved, and this is completely separate stuff. So according to that logic, the birds that would be in here, you had three and others too, so that must be, according to the Chachamim, the birds that were there left, and now these are new birds. So they're muktzah birds because the ones that you designated before Yantif to eat, or to shacht and eat, are no longer there. So that's Now it happens to be it's not important to our understanding of the Gemara. There's machlokas Rashi and Tosfos according to Rabbi what you would do. If there's 100, excuse me, not according to Rabbi, yeah, what would you do? If there was 100 and now 200, and we say that part of it is regular maaser sheni and some of it is maaser sheni money and some of it is other money, according to Rashi, you just take you take some of the coins and say, if these are the maaser sheni money already, great, these are, and if not, we're transferring it from that coin onto this coin. And Tosfos doesn't like that because he says if the coins are all the same type of coins, like silver and silver, you can't transfer from one coin to another coin that's the same. So he says that you have to transfer it to a different one and then back onto some of these coins. But so that's not really germane to our understanding of our Gemara, but it's important. It's important machlokas in regard to transferring the kedusha of maaser sheni coins. So the Gemara says, "Afilu timer rabbanan." No, it could work out even according to the rabbanan because Haidmar Allah, it was taught about our Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lazar, Dami Travayu. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar both said, "Shani gozalos hova suin lidado, lidado, you say $2, lidados." Birds are different than other things because they will hop around. They have legs; they can move. Coins don't have legs, so they don't move. So if the coin isn't all there, someone must have moved it. If the bird isn't there, well, birds do tend to move, so we can attribute it. So the cases aren't exactly analogous. So what's true about the coins does not have to apply to the birds. So our Mishnah could fit in either at the Rebbe or according to the Chacham. So why did Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar find it necessary? We turn to 10b3 to explain our Mishnah that's saying Shani goes all hova va'asuin ledados. Why are young birds different? Because they hop around. Because we learned about the other brisa about the money, the maaser sheni coins in the box to Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lazar, the same two Amoraim. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lazar explained. So basically, are we changing something about the bird Mishnah to fit in with the maaser sheni brisa, or are we going to change something in the maaser sheni brisa to fit with our bird Mishnah? That's kind of what the Gemara is talking about right here. Now, if you would want to change a Mishnah or a brisa, my opinion, for what it's worth, and maybe it's not worth anything, is that it would be better to change. Well, that's not true. If there's a textual change to make, it's better to change a brisa because the Mishnah was codified by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, so it has more. It's been vetted, let's say, and the brisas weren't vetted by Rabbi. So if there's a mistake in a text, if the two are in variance in regard to a text, it would make more sense to change the text of a brisa. But here, there are schools of thought. There's a book by someone named, his nickname is Shas. I forget his first name. Maybe Rabbi Yeshua Cohen wrote about a book about how to do Chazara properly to remember. So he mentioned something in the name of Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner, that basically if you look through Amoraim, there's a certain group of Amoraim when there's a certain types of disagreement between a brisa and a Mishnah. Some change the brisa, some might change the Mishnah by limiting it to a more narrow case than what we sounded, and some might. Okay, I don't remember this right, so I'm probably not saying it over correctly, but some might. I don't remember the second thing right now. But there were two, he basically says, in the name of Chaim Volozhiner, there were two, shall we say, philosophical approaches. Do we want to keep the Mishnah as is but limit the case that it's talking about, or will we do something else where we're not limiting the case as much? And I don't remember exactly what he said. So that's a big question. It's not important about the psak, but it's just interesting. Okay. But here, so in this case, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar limited the case or explained why the case of our Mishnah is different than the brisa about the coins. But now the Gemara is saying, but Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar changed. They limited the case, or they made a specific observation about the case of the brisa about the coins The maaser sheni says chadamer b'shnei chisin machlokas. The machlokas between Rabbi and the Chachamim is only when it's two different containers where the money are in. Aval b'kis echad, but if everyone says that the money of the maaser sheni was all in the same container, divrei kol chulin. When you had 200 and then only 100 was there, everyone holds its chulin, because no one would say that you took part of the maaser sheni money out. You must have moved it to something else. V'chad amar, so Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar, in this case, they both made a different, they explained the case a little differently. In our case, they both said the same thing. Here, they both said, they made it an observation about that case to distinguish it from us. V'chad amar, in either Rabbi Lazar or Rabbi Yochanan said, B'kisachan machlokas, the machlokas between Rabbi and the Chachamim is when the coins are in one container, avo b'shnei kisim, but if they're in two different containers, divrei kol manamunach manamutal. Everyone, Rabbi and the Chachamim both hold that that the remaining 100 zuz that are left in this are definitely maaser sheni, and the other one was moved to somewhere else. So bish lama lamanda amar b'shnei chisim machlokas. We understand, according to the opinion, that the machlokas between Rabbi and the Chachamim are when the money is in two different containers. So that's why the Gemara, that's why they had to change, or I shouldn't say change, they had to explain that our case of our Mishnah about the birds is where they can jump around. That's why they needed to explain that our Mishnah is talking about birds are different than coins because birds hop around. But according to the opinion that said that Rabbi and the Chachamim are arguing, if you found them in the same, the maaser sheni money was less in the same container, but if they were in two different containers, the Rabbi and the Chachamim both agree that 100 of the originals are here. 100 of them you move somewhere else. Hashna lama li lishnoi Allah. Then why do we have to say that birds are different? Because in this case they would be similar. According to that opinion, if they're in two different containers, there's no machlokas. So here too, a bird. So you had two birds here and one bird left. So the money is still here. Then this case is analogous. So why did they have to change, Rabbi Lazar or Rabbi Yochanan? Why did they have to change the case of our Mishnah or point out that birds are different? Young birds are different than coins because birds can move around. They have legs and coins don't. So Ravashi says, because we're talking about a case where these young birds are tied to each other, and the two containers that are holding the money are also tied to each other. So therefore, they're very similar. So gozalos menatchi hadadi. But the birds, because they don't necessarily move together, they might cause the knot of the string, whatever that's tying them, to get untied. But because the containers that have the coins don't have legs, it's not gonna untie by itself. So therefore, they still had to. So because the cases seem to be very similar, that the birds were tied and the containers were tied, therefore they had to say, even though they're tied, the logic is different because the birds hop around, they might cause the knot to get untied. So it's even though we wouldn't say that the containers would separate, but it's still possible to say that the birds would separate. So there still is a difference between the case of the maaser sheni in the containers and our birds having three birds and one leaving the dafka. The Rabbi Amelacha, and Rabbi would tell you, kisanami zimnin, even containers that have coins, sometimes the misakal katrayu, sometimes the knot goes away. So it didn't get pulled apart, but somehow the knot becomes undone, and therefore it's possible that one of the containers has maaser sheni money in it, and so 100 zuz were in this container, 100 were in that container. They were tied together, but somehow the knot got undone, and that one disappeared. We don't know where that money is, but this money that's here is still assumed to have 100. Is still the 100 that's in it is maaser sheni money. Okay, Yud Aleph Amud Aleph 11a. So the Mishnah says if you designated them inside the dovecote, inside one of the birdhouse, but then you found them, let's say, on the ledge in front of it, you're not allowed to use those birds on Yantif because we don't assume they're the same birds, and these are now muktzah birds because they're not the same ones you designated. Let's say that this follows the opinion of Rabbi Chanina, because Rabbi Chanina said, Rov v'karov halecha achar harov. I think we actually started this last week also. So the case in the Gemara in Bava Basra, I mean, it has to do with birds also, but the case was they found someone was killed, and the halach is you have to bring an egel rufa, so you measure to the nearest city. So the question is, what if there's a city that's close that has 100 people, and let's say there's a big city with 10,000 people, it's a little bit further. But what's more likely? That 1 out of 100 of this closer city it killed this person, or 1 out of 10,000? I mean, 1 out of 100 is a greater probability of 1 to 10,000, but you have 10,000 possible people who would have gone to Herod and killed this person versus 1 out of 100. So would we follow the row? Would we follow when there's a more likely that it came from the 10,000 people, but the 100 are closer? What do we follow? The rove, the majority of people, or the closer? So out of the 1,100, out of 1,100 people, 100 are from here, 10,000 are from there. So from the case of Rove, they're probably from the 10,000. But if the other city's closer, so Rabbi Chanina holds, we follow the majority. So even though these birds are closer to this dovecote where you designated them, but Rabbi Chanina is not doesn't follow the proximity when we're talking about birds. There's more birds not in this dovecote than are outside the dovecote, so we assume that the birds that are here are not from this dovecote anymore because they're not exactly where you left them. So Amar Abaye says, Badaf. We're talking about a case where there's a flat area in front of it, so therefore it's common. So I don't know if the ledge and this thing are two different things. So, but I think I mentioned last week. So this flat area is kind of like a rest stop for the highway. The birds who are flying from somewhere else will stop on here. Because of that, there's a good likelihood that the birds that we see right now are not the same birds that we designated before Yantif. But if there wouldn't be such a ledge, then we wouldn't assume. Then we would assume that the birds that we see now are the birds that we designated before Yantif. Rava Amar, Bishnei Kinim Zulamal Mizuaskina. No, we're dealing with, you have two different holes, circles for the birds to go in, and one is on top of the other one. So, but there's no birds in either of those, but there's some in front. So in that case, the rov and the karov of Rab Chanina isn't really too so you only designated one of the birds from one of the holes. So now, because both are empty, there's no way for us to know that these birds that are in front of both of the holes, obviously they're closer to one, but not to the other, where there's not enough assurance that they are the birds that we designated, so you're not allowed to use them on Yantif. And I don't need to teach you that if you designated the birds in the lower bird pigeonhole, and you didn't designate the higher ones, and you found doves by the near the lower pigeonhole, and you didn't see any birds in the upper one, we say you're not allowed to eat them, either of them. Damrina and Hanach Azula Alma, the ones that you designated went away. The Hanach Ishtarbuhi Ishtarbu Vinachos. And the ones that were on the higher one came down to this little ledge in front of the lower pigeonhole. Ella afilu zimin b'elyon of lo zimin b'tachtona. Even if you designated the ones in the upper pigeonhole, and you didn't designate the ones in the lower pigeonhole, uva umatzabal yona, and you found birds outside, not inside that top pigeonhole, but on the ledge in front of the top pigeonhole, and you didn't see any on the lower pigeonhole or in the ledge. Hanach nami asiri, they're also prohibited. Damrina and hanach azula alma, v'hanach shruche sarchu sliku, because we hold that the ones that were in the top one flew away, and the ones from the lower one actually jumped up and are on the higher one. So Abaye goes so far to say that if there's ledges in front and you designated from one, but now one of them is missing, either the upper or the lower. Whether the lower ones are gone and you did the upper ones, or you designated the lower ones and now the upper ones are gone, we assume that the ones that remain are not the ones that you designated. That's what Rabbi says. And there's a machlokas between Rabbi and Rabbi. We've asked him like Rabbi, except in 6 cases, and this is not one of them. The im ein sham elahain, but if there's only these are the only birds, hareilu mutarim, you're allowed to use them. So that's what the Mishnah said. So hechidami, what's the case that these are the only birds? If these are birds that are able to fly, it's very possible to say that the birds that you designated flew away, and these birds that are here now are different ones, even though they're in front of this dovecote. So we must be talking about a case where we have very young birds who can't fly yet, but they just hop around a little bit. But if there's another dovecote within 50 amos of this one, idadu, we say that the birds will move from one dovecote to the other one, or one birdhouse to the other. And if there's no other birdhouse within 50 amma, then it's certainly these ones that you designated before Yantif are the same ones that are here now. The Amar Mar Ukva Bar Chama, because Mar Ukva Bar Chama said, any hopping bird that's too young to fly but it can hop, it doesn't travel more than 50 amma. So if there's no other birds and there's no other birdhouse, so of course these are the same birds. Why did the Mishnah need to tell us that if these are the only birds there, then it's mutter? Which actually, instead of saying if these are the only birds, you might say that the Mishnah is talking about because the Mishnah doesn't say. The Mishnah says if they are the only ones. What's the hain going on? Is the hain going on the birds, or maybe the hain is going on the dovecotes? This is the only set of dovecotes. So the Gemara says, there is another birdhouse or dovecote within 50 amma, but there's a corner between them. So there's a jutting corner. So one's over here and one's over here. So you can't see from one to the other. They're not in the line of sight to each other because of the corner. They're around the corner. I might think that the pigeons can hop and go from one to the other. Kamash Malan. So the Mishnah teaches us whenever it hops away, it only keeps hopping away from it if it can go back to where it started, meaning it's still seeing the nest that it came from. But if it can't see where it started from, it's not going to go. So that's what the Mishnah is teaching us. That even though they're within 50 amos, so these young birds can hop from one to the other, but because it's not in the line of sight, they're not going to hop. So these are the same birds. Okay, any questions? Okay, Mishnah. Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph, almost halfway down. So we saw this Mishnah last week in context of trying to say that there's a discrepancy between Beis Shammai was lenient in regard to Beis Shammai wanted us to be able to have fresh meat on Yantif, and from certain cases where Beis Shammai took a stricter view than Beis Hillel, uh, and they were less lenient to allow fresh meat. So we saw these cases last week, but now we're gonna see them again, and we're gonna see the whole Gemara's analysis about them. You're not allowed to take some type of chopping board to it's not usually used for chopping meat to cut your meat on. Beis Hillel allows you to, because Beis Shammai holds it's muktzah, because usually you do muktzah stuff with it, so you're not allowed to use it for this, even though to cut meat on a board isn't muktzah, but because this board is not usually the meat cutting board, it's muktzah. Beis Shammai Omer, and there's another case. Beis Shammai says or lifnei hadorsan. So if you shechted an animal, you're allowed to skin it in order to get to the meat. And normally, when you skin an animal, you put the skin down where people are going to walk over it, because it starts moving, or it's part of it's the beginning of the tanning process to make it into usable leather. So you want people to walk on it, so it doesn't. I guess it keeps moving, and it doesn't. I don't know exactly, and it doesn't stay stiff, and which would become unusable. Velo yagbianu elam ken yeshim ukzayis basin. You're not, and it's muktzah. You're not even allowed to move it unless there still is a kazayis of meat on it. But once it has a kazayis of meat, you can take the meat. It has enough importance, because it's a kazayis of meat is important enough that you could use it. So as long as the meat is that much meat is still on the hide itself is not muktzah. But Beis Hillel allows you to move it even if it doesn't have any meat, or it has less than a kazayis of meat remaining on it. Gemara Tana, we learned in the Brisa of Shavim Shim Kitzav Lav Basar Sha'asol Taltalo. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that if you did chop meat on this, you're not allowed to move it afterwards. Hey, give it to me, please. Amar Abaye. Abaye says, Machlokas ba'ali. The machlokas is only if you're using this type of tray, which is not, well, I shouldn't say tray, with some type of vessel, and it's not usually the meat, the one you cut your meat on. Batarba garme divra komoter. But if it's a butcher's board that you usually chop meat with, everyone agrees, even Beis Shammai, you're allowed to move it on Yantif. So the Gemara says, Pshita, of course, why wouldn't you be allowed? Eli Tanan. Our Mishnah says an Eli. An Eli is not your meat chopping board. So it's only because it's not a meat chopping board. But if it's your meat chopping board, there's no reason why it should be aser. So the Gemara says, you might think that the butcher's board has the same status of this other thing, because at the end of the day, and you might think that the Mishnah only mentioned this Eli to tell you that Beis Hillel are so makel that not just on the butcher board, which of course is you could use, but even on a muktzah one, you'd be allowed to use according to Beis Hillel. Kamash Malan. So Abai is telling us that that no, it's not the extra leniency, but that is the exact point on that the machlokas is on. Igda Amri, some said that Abaye's explanation was slightly different context. Amr Abaye said, Lo nitzcha ela filu tabra gar michadati. This is only needed because we're talking about a case where it's a brand new butcher's board. So you never used it yet. So if you don't use it now, you might decide to use it for something else. You might think that it should be muktzah because you might change your mind and not want to use it as a butcher's board. Meaning you got it here, meaning you brought it here, and then you decided, okay, I'm not going to use this. I'm not sure what I'm going to use this for, but I don't want to use it for a butcher thing yet. So the fact that you schlepped it there, it seems that it was not an easy thing to move. Kamash Malan. So the chiddush is that Beis Shammai allows you to use it, and we're not worried that you're going to change your mind and decide not to use it as a butcher board and you schlepped it for no reason on Yantif. Now, I guess it's important to say the Ramban in the mitzvah. So obviously, we're not allowed to do malacha on Shabbos. The Ramban mentions that even certain things that aren't malacha, we don't do either, because let's say someone is retired. He doesn't use that word, but that's it. And you don't really, have much work to do any part of the week. You wouldn't want to do something heavy, let's say, like moving your furniture around, even though it's not inherently a malacha, but you should refrain from activities that you don't need to do on Shabbos. So that even something that's not the negative commandment of don't do malacha, but there's also a positive commandment to rest on Shabbos and refrain from stuff that isn't a malacha. So it seems that the Gemara is saying a certain idea, or that the Gemara is giving a certain similar idea here, that to move this thing that you end up not, if you was definitely a butcher's board that you've used before, you use it, you move it to here, and it's not muksa, and you're gonna cut on it more meat. That's not a problem. But because this has never been used before, maybe you'll decide, oh, I'm not sure if I'm going to use this as a as a as a as a meat cutting tray. So the fact that you moved it for no need on Yantif. And even though Yantif isn't the same severity of Shabbos, but it seems that there's some type of similarity based on this machlokas. So then the Gemara says, does Beis Shammai not worry that you're going to change your mind about designating, or not more than designating, but actually using for something for a purpose or not? But we learned in the Beitza, you can't bring a shochet and a knife to a behema on Yantiv, and you can't bring a behema, an animal, to a shochet and a knife, because we're worried that if you bring them there or you bring it there, because I guess you're not able to shecht it yourself, you might change your mind and not want it to get shechted by that. So Rashi says you're not so close to each other. Maybe by the time that you get there, you change your mind. Molichin says you could either bring the shochet and the knife to the animal, or the animal to the shochet and the knife. Now, I don't know if it means shochet and the knife. It might mean the shochet or the knife. You might not be able to carry a knife yourself a distance to the animal, and even if so it's I don't see any indication right now if the vav is a connecting vav, it means both, or it could be a vav that means either or. Beis Shammai say, you can't bring your spice and a pestle to the mortar to grind them up on Yantif for your meal. And you can't bring the pestle to the spice and the mortar. So if all three ingredients, the mortar and the pestle and the spices, aren't in the same place, so I mean, most of the ones that we see are small, but I guess I don't know if these are talking about they're bigger, or because mortar and pestle, if something would happen to yours, you'd be in trouble. So you want to be careful with it, because there's a halach, it's mentioned somewhere in the footnotes here. There's something called kli shamlachto le'isser. Kli shamlachto le'isser is one thing, something that you usually do for a malacha with. So that there's certain leniencies when you move it, but then there's certain things that it's a very valuable thing. A telescope, I think a shechita knife is a machlokas, which category it falls into, because you shot with it. I mean, but which is mutter on Yantif, but on a Shabbos, but it's also something that's usually valuable. So, let's say a telescope is usually valuable, or used to talk about cameras with the lenses, not with their cell phones. I don't know. And so if something is very valuable, so you don't want to move it in general because it's professionally important. That's more strict. There's more limitations of the ability to move that versus something that is just something used for malacha. So I don't know if the mortar and pestle would be valuable because if you break your mortar or your pestle now, I mean, the mortar is pretty hard to break. It's just a heavy blob, right? But okay, well, we're finishing in a few minutes.
Isn't it like a ball? Or
The pestle is like a ball,
Yeah, no.
right?
Or
So
just like
right, a thick thing to grind it up in. So I mean, to me, it doesn't seem but that it would be that valuable. But I mean, I guess, because you're using pressure to crush things, it's not such a simple thing to make you to have the powder make another one because that might be not strong enough. I don't know.
Oh, they don't make them anymore. No.
Well, it's because everything comes.
They have one 150, 200 years old. From a great grandparent. And we wouldn't be able to find it.
Okay. Right. So maybe so that's what I'm saying. Maybe then I don't know because no one uses it anymore. Maybe they were considered valuable things because they had to be super strong. It's possible. So Beis Hillel Omer Molichin Zayit Zed. Beis Hillel say you can bring him to the other. So it seems to be Shammai for both of these cases. No, we're gonna light that in a minute because we didn't daven in here tonight. We daven here in the morning. We're gonna light this one.
You only like davening in the morning. That's all.
The one where the room that we daven in. The room, right? But there's a minhag in a shul to light it in the morning at minyan. It's a very good question. So we see from these cases about the shochet or the shechting knife to the animal and the spice and the mortar and the pestle aren't in the same place. Beis Shammai is worried that you might change your mind before you actually get there, and so it ends up that you exerted yourself for no reason on Yontif or possibly move something that was muktzah that if you would have done what you wanted to do, it wasn't muktzah. But then if you end up not doing it, you're allowed to crush these spices on Yontif to use for your cooking right now. But if you ended up that you decide your mind and not to use it, then there was no need to move this mortar or the pestle. So, but then there would be a difference though, because the spices, unground spices, would they have a status of muktzah at all? Just because they're not.
You can't grind them, so they're useless, right?
But if you designate it before Yantif,
Oh,
then it not. But then it ends up to move something and then decide, oh, I'm not cooking with it to make a muktzah. No, so that doesn't sound like it would be a muktzah issue. Maybe it would be a resting on Yantif issue. I'm just trying to figure out, is the Gemara telling us that it's a possible muktzah issue or a possible exerting yourself on Yantif for something that you're not using. So Gemara says, Hachi hasta. But why are you trying to compare these cases? Bishlam behema asilim luche. It makes sense that you might decide to change your mind about shechting an animal. The Amar nishbek hai behema kachusha. This animal is not such a fatty animal, so I'm going to leave this. Umaisa behema achrita dishmeina mina. Now I'm going to give a more fat animal. Or lahavdil, if you have to walk the animal for 15 minutes, you might be worried it's going to burn too many calories and get skinnier on the walk. Kederanami asilim luche. And a pot or a container, you also might change your mind. The Amar Nishbak Haikadir Debai Tavlin. I'm going to not use this bowl or whatever that needs. You're changing your menu. I'm not going to make this dish. In the Kaira doesn't necessarily mean in the Gemara the actual bowl, but it means I'm making a certain dish with a recipe. He might change his mind on what he's gonna make, and he's gonna make something that doesn't need the spices. But hacha ma'ikol meimar. But if you have meat that you want to chop, why are you going to change your mind? Mimlach lo tavar. Are you going to change your mind and not cut the meat up? Kevin the shakal devir kaima. Once you're ready, shafted the meat. You have the meat already. You're definitely going to cut it up because you can't use a whole side unless Fred Flintstone. Uh, you're not gonna, or someone at a kiddush, you're not gonna eat such a big piece without cutting it up. So so don't seem to be comparable. Beishamai Omer may nosinessa or Beishamai says you're not allowed to put the hide. That's based on Tana. So we learned in the Beitza Beishamai Shamochin Ela Basar Litzli. Beishamai and agree that you're allowed to salt meat for roasting on top of this hide. So Amar Abai says Lo Shanu Ela Litzli. This halacha was only said in regard to roasting the meat of low, but if you wanted to salt it for cooking, you are not allowed to. So let's just read to the Gemara and then talk about this for a moment. Pshita, of course, that makes sense. It's litan. The Mishnah said for roasting. So if it hello, we'll see. I'll be home in like 3 minutes. Okay. Oh, okay. We'll talk about it in a couple minutes. Okay. No, I can't hit it right now. I need a couple minutes. I'll call you back in 3 minutes. Sorry. Okay, bye. So roasting, you only put a little bit of salt. When you're gonna cook meat or do whatever you want with it, and not just roast. So basically, the way we kasher liver, because liver, all the blood goes through the liver, we say there's no amount of salting that it's enough to get out all the blood, and the only way to kasher liver is by roasting it. We put under the broiler or whatever, so then the blood comes out. So when we roast, the halacha actually is you don't need to put any salt at all. But the minhag is, as Tosfos points out here, that we do put a little bit of salt before we roast. But if you're going to do whatever you want with it, especially not roasting it, you need to put a lot of salt to completely cover. I think the halacha is you only need one side, but we do both sides, restricted to make sure it gets all the blood out. So that needs a lot more. So if the Mishnah only says you could salt it, just with just a little bit of salt in order to roast, that's obviously a lot less than for the amount of salt that we need for cooking. So what's the problem? The problem is that part of the tanning process is they would cure it by putting a lot of salt on. So if you'd only be putting a little bit of salt on for the roasting, you're not really doing enough to get the tanning process underway. And the tanning process is not mutter on yantif. We only allow you to hide to skin the animal because that's so you can get to the meat. But tanning it has nothing to do with yantif. You're not allowed to do it. If you'd pour a lot of salt over the hide, we worry that you're going to be generous with the salt because you're going to get the tanning process underway on the hide, and that's not okay. So the Gemara says, "Hakamash Malan." This is teaching us that filu tzli ke'in kedera aser, even if that's only if you're using the amount that you would normally use to roast. But if you're going to roast it, but you're salting it as if you're going to not roast it, that would be aser, because you're trying to make a trick to get the tanning process underway, and that is, we don't let you do that trick.
So is the meat still attached to the hide?
No, I think it means that you have the meat and you want to put it down on top of the hide. And if you're going to put a lot of salt, some of it is going to slip off, because when you do it for enough to cook, you put a lot on, so much that if you pick it up, some is going to roll off because you make sure it's completely covered. Whereas if you're putting it to roast, you're not going to cover everything. So, so if you pick it up, a little bit's going to fall off, but it's not going to make a big deal. That's how I have to make a disclaimer. I never actually saw Malicha take place because I asked my Bobby how she did it, but since she moved to the north side, all the meat is already kashered. So, and the places where they shafted and salted, they're not so keen on visitors. A friend of mine tried to when he would learn Malicha, tried to go, and they were pretty suspicious.
Do they salt it in Hungarian?
I don't think so. I think the shacht houses do it completely, and
the big slabs of meat.
Yeah, I think it comes already shechted, already salted. They don't leave it let the shach. If up to 40 years ago, whatever, there was a shaila because some seems it's, but it's because when they didn't do it in the shacht house, there's an opinion if you freeze it or if you keep rinsing it, before it gets dry, but rinsing it every 3 days and they really rinsing it, there's a separate shaila in and of itself. Or some say so if you freeze it right away, then you don't have to rinse it because it's frozen. But these are shilas that I don't think they have to deal with anymore because I think they salt it right away at the shacht house. Okay, happy Hanukkah.